Hey everyone, I woke up and I decided to dunk on the Western traditions. That's why I'm here. But in all seriousness, I've been thinking about a lot of things when it comes to how the how sometimes the Western tradition, especially more modern works, are approaching magic in a very ableist way, especially magical development and magical evolution. So what brought this up is Timothy Leary's Evolutionary Agents, which, by the way, it's not his original title. This is adapted from, um, let's see. Sorry, I feel that this press is rather crooked. Ronan, Berkeley, California. Um, the Intelligence Agents. So, um, the Intelligence Agents is the original book that Timothy Leary wrote. And, well, let's just get into it. So he has the neurological developmental stages. And stage one, newborn, amoeboid brained. At this stage, we operate with amoeboid brains. At this stage, we find newly born babies, the terminally ill, and those with genetic defects. See, we started off ableist, just right off the bat. I understand what he might be referring to when he says with those with genetic defects, but from here on out, it's basically what it is that you are able to do determines um how far along the neurological development stages you have progressed. And a lot of the theory here is that um if you are actually an immortal being on a soul metaphysical level that has phenomenal cosmic powers, and you can be born anytime that you like and do anything that you want on that subconscious level. And so you're living in this physical life is simply a reflection of the experience that your subconscious wants you to live so that you can learn something or so that it can learn something. Then if somebody's in a wheelchair, it's basically their fault. That's how it goes. It goes that basically your subconscious chose to put you in a wheelchair so you could have that experience. Except that in this, instead of saying that you chose to be that way and you're that way because you decided to have that experience, you just don't get it on this level, but you'll get it in your afterlife or whatever. It's just like really insulting, I think. Cats ran across the floor upstairs. They were so upset. um But here, Timothy Leary is basically saying that you, as a spiritual being, have managed to progress your evolution a certain extent, and your ability in this world, like your ability and your health, everything reflects in how, like, it's reflecting what it is that you did spiritual progress wise. And this is so strange to me because Timothy Leary and his student Robert Anton Wilson love to draw upon all kinds of Eastern mysticism tropes whenever they write. And one of the tropes that everybody loves to pull from Eastern mysticism is the blind monk, or the blind mystic, if we want to go over to India with it. But like, they they love it whenever people are blind, but they can't actually get it into their heads that would mean that somebody took an L on purpose if they were blind spiritually. So, like, I don't see that this point of view is actually workable. I understand that we want to say, okay, if your development on a spiritual level above this physical plane, on your eternal level of existence that exists beyond this life, you are doing certain things, and progress in along those lines is going to be reflected by your physical nature in this world. I can accept that as a premise, but I don't think that interpreting people's is mental illness, their physical illness, their abilities, whether somebody broke a leg, whether somebody wasn't born with a leg, whether somebody was born like intersex, something that, by the way, Timothy Leary never, ever, ever, ever talks about. is what happens if you were born outside of the gender binary. Something that happened in his time and he knew it. You can have people be born with like different genital arrangements than are the standard. We've got stories about that since the ancient Greek myths. So if you're not incorporating that into your theory of how everything works with mysticism, then it's not complete and it doesn't work. I understand the premise here of evolutionary agents. I agree with some of it. I think that on some level, the human species does actually like have somebody be born with certain abilities so that the species can progress instead of that individual progress. And like I I think it's actually workable on the species and individual level. Excuse me just a second. But I don't think that they have an understanding of just how useful it is to not have an ability. Like I don't think that it works the same way as they're looking at from their perspective. From their perspective, if you have this eternal part of yourself that could do anything at any time, why didn't it just go ahead and make sure that you were born with the ability to walk? But what if you would develop into a different person if you were born with the ability to walk? And what if you want to be that different person? What if you want to be not that different person? That's like that's a way that you could choose. But what if there was never the ability to choose whether or not you could have that physical defect and it's simply going to be there? What if you were always going to be like that? There was never going to be any changing it. The only thing you really could change is how you reacted to it and how you dealt with it. Because I do not think that our subconscious has the ability to just make things not happen. I think our subconscious has the ability to help us mitigate and mediate the happening of things. So there's no going back in time and making it to where you could walk again and you're not in the wheelchair, or to where, you were actually, born with the right organs or whatever. There's taking it forward and saying, okay, and from here on out, we're going to try to make a world where you can exist in a happier way, because we're going to pick up the ball and get it rolling from here. In terms of progress, where does progress start? People can progress at any point, and there's no stage that you're at that you're progressing out of. Everyone's at the same stage. I think this whole stage thing of development is really a projection onto current humanity of something that is really a misunderstanding of science. Darwin was saying that evolution like goes from simple to complex, that survival, that origin of the species and all, that natural selection basically selects for better skills, but it doesn't really. It selects for the skills that help you adapt at the time. It selects for the skills that happened to keep that entity alive at the time so that they could pass on their genetics. But we have no idea whether those skills actually helped them survive. Those are just the skills that they had in their genes. And so Darwin had something workable. And I do believe that natural selection does typically select for the strongest abilities that will actually help with the situation at hand. But there are many ways in which natural selection basically won't do that. And you just end up with a lot of traits that may not be explainable as being particularly useful or particularly um like necessary from some observers' perspective, but they're still there. um, there's no one set of traits that you're supposed to have or that you have to have. Um, And so like there's this just homogeneity that is in the Western tradition when it comes to the approach of what the default mage is supposed to be able to do. Every single ritual I have ever seen designed for the Western tradition is designed to where you can be standing. And I know people who cannot stand. So, one, just the bias that whoever does these things is going to be walking around on two legs. It's I know it's it seems like it's a lot to ask to not assume that, but once you make one friend who is in a wheelchair, you will start noticing how many things you assumed about your own legs and how many people can use their legs. Make one friend who's in a wheelchair and go with them to places. Go with them to a restaurant. Help them get in and out of their car. Have a conversation with them about their bathroom experiences in a public bathroom. And you'll start to understand just how much everyone assumes that everyone else can do. And that the people who can't do that, just how much trouble they have to go through because of other people's assumptions. And a lot of times there are assumptions that just don't need to be made. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my friend was barred from access to any number of activities and experiences due to one step. Just one step was enough to keep him out of a place. All for lack of a ramp, all for lack of planning. And like, it really sucks. It really sucks for him that this is a huge barrier for entry to him, but to everyone else, it's nothing that they can just step over without even thinking about it. And I think that that's what is in the Western tradition whenever we rely on people to do things just to enter through the door and we don't even think about it. There's so many things in the Western tradition where it's like this ritual must be done in this way, exactly this way, and there's no reason given. And like, I would like to modify this ritual because whoever is going to be participating in this ritual has dyslexia, and everything that you've put in here is unreasonable to ask them to, like, you know, do for some reason. Or like any kind of inability to do this particular thing. Like, there should be a way to just edit it. These rituals are not as nailed down as you think they are. They are not as carved in stone as everyone is making them out to be. Almost all of the rituals in the Western tradition are just there to trick your senses into getting caught up in something so your subconscious can go do something. You usually that's all you're doing is just distracting yourself so the rest of yourself can do some work now. And there's no reason to hold this to cling this tightly to personal preferences and then project them as like the entire Western tradition, which is what I feel is going on most of the time. I think the most insulting thing I've seen is a tendency to take something like an allergy or a disability or an illness and say, "Oh, spirituality can cure that. Now that you're here, we can actually do away with all that." Can't tell you how many times I have experienced or heard of somebody experiencing going to an event and there's bread or some other food that they can't consume for some reason. And then somebody at the event says, "Oh, don't worry, the spirits are going to take care of it for you, and that you're not going to be allergic to gluten this time. You can eat the bread and you'll be just fine. There's an angel here, and he's going to make an exception for you." Um, can't tell you how many times I've seen this depicted, and every single time, like, So I've had a lot of food issues throughout my life, and there's still times actually, like alcohol's a no-go for me right now. So if somebody's like, oh, my goddess says that you can have as much wine as you want at this ritual, or not even, or just even like, my goddess says you can have a glass of wine, it'll be fine. No, your goddess doesn't get to say that. Like, learn to step off of other people's medical issues as your provenance to give them spiritual advice on. Like, just if somebody has a medical issue, that is how their body is right now, and that is the condition they have, and that is the reality that they're in right now. You can't just ignore that reality and create a new one for them and say, here, step into this new reality I've made for you where it's better. That doesn't work. That's not how change occurs. If you're going to go from one to the other, you've got to have some kind of work be done, honestly. Um, and I honestly feel that most of this is on humans, that, like, I don't think spirits are this annoying. I don't think that they actually make this many assumptions. I think that this is human misinterpretation for the most part, but, like, do not tell somebody that, oh, you're allergic to gluten. It's okay. I'm gonna make your gluten allergy go magically away today. Would you do that with peanuts? Like, I've seen this with somebody who you know, could not have alcohol for, like, medical reasons, and it's like, oh, don't worry, you can have like one sip of the ritual wine, it'll be fine. It's like, no. Why do you need it like that? If you can't answer, then you don't need it like that. I think that a lot of times us medical loopholes, really force people to examine assumptions that they had never examined before. And sometimes when people have that moment where they have the option of examining their assumption, or of just leaving things exactly as they are and making up a reason why they don't have to question it. And quite a lot of times I see people just turn around and not bother to question it. Just go on doing exactly as they were doing. And what sucks is that, like, it's not that everybody has to do it completely different because this one person can't do it that same way. It's just you need to start making exceptions. You need to start being flexible. None of this stuff is supposed to be done in exactly the same way for any good reason. The only time you do things in exactly the same way each time is if you're trying to keep the information intact. Like if you have an oral tradition where it's like every single time we tell the story, it has to be with these words. There you go. You have a reason to actually do that, because that way you know what the material is. You're trying to preserve the material, and you're trying to preserve it in a way that if all of the records of it were, destroyed, it would still be there because it's still in people's memory. That makes sense to preserve in exactly the same way. It doesn't make sense to preserve most other things in exactly the same way. Things change too much over time, and they change very quickly. They always have, and they always will. There's no thing where it's like, oh, in the past things changed much more slowly. So no, actually, they changed just as fast back then, and we just, like, time destroys evidence. Time destroys variance. There's only so many books and scrolls and materials that we have really showing us what happened in the past when it came to the Western tradition. And, like, there's only so much we can infer. There was, of course, much more than we'll ever be able to discover. People were doing many more things than we know of. You have to leave a room in your mind, in your imagination, open for the possibilities that must have been occurring. You have to leave space, leave room for the stuff you don't know. And when it comes to the ableism, I really think it's just like for any given magical thing that you're trying to get other people to do. Because if this is for yourself, then write it for yourself. But if you're writing something and you're like, all magicians should be able to do this, and involves something that requires walking or standing, you've failed at the all magicians part. My best suggestion is to think through each of the senses and each of the physical things that you're asking for people to do. And for each of those things, is there something that somebody wouldn't be able to do if they had like either lack of use of one of their senses or lack of use of a physical ability for whatever reason? And just, try to figure out, is this something that they could figure out on their own, that they can just, get past and get around? Or have I written this, have I constructed this in a way that if somebody can't walk, they can't do this at all? That there's really no clear, understandable way for them to progress because I've built this for only people who can walk. If that's the case, then figure out what you'd tell that person. There's all kinds of things you can do, but like just remember that person exists, and they're probably going to be reading your work at some point if this is something that's for public consumption. And when they read it, they're going to have a different experience than the people who can walk. And so just think about that experience. And if you had that experience, how would you feel? What would you want to be told? I understand that sometimes, there's just not going to be a workaround, or you're not going to know exactly what the workaround would be. For instance, maybe you did an article on mountain climbing. I understand there's certain people who are just never going to climb a mountain. There's also certain people who you would be surprised would climb a mountain. And some of them have abilities that you would think would some of them don't have abilities that you would think would be necessary for mountain climbing. So don't doubt a person's desire to figure out how to get something done if they want to. Because there's lots of people who want to do these things even if they don't have the same set of abilities that you do. If they want that, how would they do that? You don't always have to give every single instruction set for everything. But if you've kind of put a barrier in the way of someone being able to go forward with your very instruction set, try to put a little dispensation in there. Say, hey, if you can't quite do this, then try to have an experience that is conducive to the thing I've written here. Because most of the occult rituals are about having an experience, so that again, your subconscious can facilitate for transformation in some way, while your conscious self is wrapped up in the experience. You don't need legs to have an experience. So, like, just I find that whenever I think in this way, I stop committing myself to this one very, very tiny idea, and I start thinking more broadly in a way that helps me learn about a bigger thing than I had thought before. So I'd say take this as an opportunity to learn something different and maybe broaden your horizons in a way that you wouldn't expect. That's pretty much it. When it comes to ableism, it's not that everyone wants you to cater to their every single concern and their every single issue. It's just that they don't want to feel shut out, and they don't want to feel like they don't belong. It's pretty easy to include everybody when it comes to that kind of stuff.